Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you folks, I have a brand new Tiny D6 video because we're going to saddle up and we're going to head out west because I'm talking about Tiny Gunslingers today. Specifically, going to take some time and talk about 10 different characters to inspire your Tiny Gunslingers character creation, if you will. And I'm going to dive into it here with the first one from a Sergio Corbucci film. This is Silence from the movie The Great Silence. And what I like about this character and what I find interesting about this character is his use of a Mauser broom handle pistol. Essentially, this was a Western set towards the dying days of the Old West, if you will. The character himself doesn't say anything during the whole film, which is actually really interesting. The film itself is set in the snow, so it's a spaghetti western in the snow, if you will. And, well, the other thing is he's kind of a weird character because he's not necessarily a good guy. He does antagonize the bad guys to try to draw on him first, and then essentially he mercilessly guns them down with his Mauser pistol. But it all makes for an interesting character that's essentially nothing more than a bounty hunter. I'm going to move on here to essentially the great survivor of all this, if you will, and that is Tuco the Rat from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And the character was well played by the actor, and essentially this is another character that's actually a criminal. He's not a good guy whatsoever. He's cool, he's calm, he's calculating, and essentially he's always got something going. He's always thinking. And essentially at the end of the day, he's always surviving. At least until he meets Clint Eastwood at the end of the film, who kills him. Either ways. Moving on. I would be remiss if I did not throw in one here from John Wayne. This is J.B. Books. And the shootist is the film, and essentially J.B. Books in the film finds out that essentially he is dying of cancer and just kind of wants to peacefully live out his days. And essentially when the people of the town he's trying to stay in finds out who he is and that he's in town, they decide to try go murder hobo on essentially the West's best gunmen. Of course, it doesn't work out for many of them. And it does actually make for a pretty interesting movie, considering when John Wayne did this film, he was actually in pretty poor health at the time. But I feel the film was great overall, and what makes the character interesting is even though essentially he's nothing more than a gunman for hire, he still has a certain level of honor to him, if you will. He's kind of got his own code of honor, which makes him an interesting character, in my opinion. The next one here is Colonel Mortimer from For a Few Dollars More. And essentially this is Lee Van Cleef, or it stars Lee Van Cleef. And I just like the look and the feel of the character. Lee Van Cleef pulls it off. He does talk a bit during the film, but he doesn't really need to say any more than he really needs to. His sharp features really sells the character. He doesn't come off as a good guy, nor does he necessarily come off as a villain. He is also an ex-Army cavalry officer going through the background of the character himself, and essentially he is out to revenge his sister's murder. Now, the other thing I think that is also interesting about this character is the use of a Colt butt line special, which essentially was a very long-barreled Colt. Now, the next thing, too, is he actually uses the stock in the film. I've seen other films where they've used Colt buttline specials, but they tend not to use the attachable stock. He's actually a character that does use the attachable stock. The next thing, too, is he's actually got a pretty wide array of weaponry, especially on his horse. He's got, various shotguns, rifles, pistols, etc. And at the end of the day, he gets revenge for his sister's murder. The next character I want to talk about starred Charles Bronson, and that is Harmonica from Once Upon a Time in Mexico. And essentially, this is, once again, another revenge story. But what I like the most about this character is, once again, the character says, I want to say he says nothing, but I do think he does have some dialogue. Very minimalistic dialogue in the film. But essentially, he lets the harmonica do the talking. And once you hear the harmonica, you're in deep shit because he's coming to kill you. And I just love how Charles Bronson pulls off that deadpan stare while he was playing the harmonica. All right, we're going to look at another one from Sugio Kubuchi, and that character is Django, starring Franco Nero. This is the original Django. This is not Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. This is the 1960s Django, which launched a whole franchise of Django films. However, only 2 of them stars Franco Nero, the first one being Django, and the second one being Django Strikes Back. Both pretty good films, and once again, a character that's not necessarily a good guy. Per se, he's actually not a good guy, but he's less of a villain than the movie's antagonist. And of all the characters on this list, well, he's really tough, and he's the only one that wields a machine gun. Yes, folks, he actually wields a machine gun that you see here, which it's not really a machine gun. It's kind of something they dolled up for the movie. But hey, you know what? I'll go with it because machine guns are fucking cool. The next character I'm going to talk about here is from Tom Selleck, or essentially stars as Tom Selleck as Quigley from Quigley Down Under. I like this character. He's got a strong moral code. He embodies the idea of who a good guy is and who they should be. And the next thing I really like about this character and found really interesting about the character is he actually doesn't use a pistol. He does once in the film, but it's towards the end of the film, and it's kind of like the climax moment, and he uses the pistol. But essentially, throughout the whole movie, he's actually using the specialized Sharps rifle. I don't quite remember the caliber. I think it was like 50-100 or 50-110, some ridiculous caliber like that. And essentially, he's an expert marksman with that rifle, pulling off the famous, I think it was like 1,500-yard bucket shot, which, by the way, many people has actually tried to do and has replicated the results with the same rifle. So, pretty cool character overall, and I just like the idea of a long-range sharpshooter pretty much being the hero of the day. The next character I'm going to talk about here is pretty much what got Clint Eastwood's career off the ground and made him a superstar in Hollywood, and that is The Man with No Name, and that it covers the Dollars trilogy. This character actually has more movies than any of the other characters in the film, as that covers Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Although they change his name a few times in the series, like in The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, if I remember correctly, they call him Blondie. But essentially, The Man with No Name. And the other interesting thing about this character is, well, he's actually got a comic book series. There is actually a Man with No Name comic series that I'm not sure if it's still in production, but it was being made by Dynamite. Now, a couple things I want to point out about this character is he does have a bit of a moral code, but it's kind of a shady moral code. And realistically, at the end of the day, he is not a hero. He's nothing more than a simple bounty hunter. The next one I want to discuss here is the Jeff Bridges version of Rooster Cogburn. Although, realistically, I don't feel there's anything really wrong with John Wayne's version of Rooster Cogburn, but I feel that Jeff Bridges' version of Rooster Cogburn embodies the character much better and much more accurately. And essentially, he's just got like this like true grit look to him. Hence the name of the film, True Grit, I guess. But essentially, you have an older bounty hunter, if you will. I think actually he's a marshal. And yeah, you know what? He pretty much takes on a gang of punks. And even though he's technically a lawman, he has no problem about gunning down someone who needs gunned down. And there's actually some rather hilarious scenes in the movie. So if you haven't seen the movie itself, you need to go see it. Now, you're going to get a 2-for-1 special on this one, folks, because I couldn't decide which character to really go with here, because I think they're both great characters for a Tiny Gunslingers campaign. We'll start off with Wyatt Earp, who is obviously a famous lawman, and he was at the shootout at the OK Corral. He was a marshal. He was many things. The thing I like about Wyatt Earp is he doesn't really say anything that he needs to. He's kind of got like a tough tone to him, and he tries to set his way with words, and if that don't work, well, a fight it is, and he's more than happy to get in a gunfight. With that being said, Wyatt Earp was not a perfect character. He had many flaws to him, and I think that's actually what makes Wyatt Earp an interesting character, let alone of this whole list. Wyatt Earp was a real person. And then the other character here is Doc Holliday, who starred as Val Kilmer. And now both of these characters are in the film Tombstone, which, once again, great watch. You should just go watch that film. But the thing I like about Doc Holliday as a character is he's just kind of like this wild pistolero. He likes to gamble. He likes to drink. You know, he's definitely a borderline criminal. Actually, you might even be able to consider him a criminal in many cases. And with all that being said, he's more than willing to be your Huckleberry anytime, any place, all night long. Now, before I dive into the next one here, if you all were keeping your scorecards, I just gave you 10 characters. Let's get into number 11, because I could not pass up adding an 11th one, and in my opinion, my favorite one.
I'm looking for Josie Wales.
That'd be me.
You're wanted, Wales.
I reckon I'm right popular. You a bounty hunter?
Yeah, he's got to do something for a living these days.
Dying ain't much of a living, boy.
That's right, folks. The final one for this video is going to be the outlaw, Josie Wales. Once again, starring Clint Eastwood, rough and tough. I really enjoy this character because essentially it all comes down to it's another revenge story. A man that's a simple farmer when the Civil War breaks out. His family is murdered in front of his eyes. His farm is torched by soldiers from the Union Army. He joins the Confederacy and goes on an absolute warpath. And then essentially when the war ends and the Confederacy is told to turn in their arms, he pretty much goes, nah, I'll be okay, and rides off into the sunset with basically a bunch of bounty hunters and everyone else in the country after him. And it makes for an interesting story. The character himself is not really a criminal per se. His only crime is fighting for a losing army, a lost cause, if you will. And that's even what makes the character even more interesting. Because essentially, basically everybody pushes him to the limit and he guns them all down. Great movie overall. Another classic Western film that you all just need to go watch. And I think this Josie Wales would make a great character for a Tiny Gunslingers campaign. Especially because he wields dual Colt Walker revolvers. Anyway, folks, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I am going to wrap it up for today. Have yourselves a wonderful day.